Board will now reconvene to open session and report out from the closed session. Regarding agenda item number 3.1, recommended expulsions, education course section 48,900. May I have a motion and a second to accept staff's recommendation and expel student number 1?
So moved.
Student is to be placed at Hayward Community School.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Nishihira.
Aye.
Canlis.
Aye.
Wong.
Aye.
Kaur.
Aye.
Chima.
Aye. May I have a motion and second to accept staff's recommendation to expel student number 2 and suspend the enforcement? Student is to remain at Coney Caraballo High School.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Nishihira.
Aye.
Canlis.
Aye.
Wong.
Aye.
Kaur.
Aye.
Chima.
Aye. Regarding agenda item number 3.2, public employee performance evaluation, there is nothing to report. Regarding agenda item number 3.3, public employee discipline, dismissal, and release, there is nothing to report. Agenda item number 3.4, update on negotiations with the New Haven Unified School District bargaining units, conference with the legal counsel, government code section 3549.1, there is nothing to report. Agenda item number 4, pledge of allegiance, please. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Agenda item number 4.2, roll call, please.
Martinez.
Here.
Romero.
Here.
Nishihira.
Here.
Canlis.
Here.
Wong.
Here.
Kaur.
Here.
Chima.
Here. Agenda item number 4.3, approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and second to approve tonight's agenda as amended?
So moved. Second.
Roll call, please.
Martinez.
Aye.
Romero.
Aye.
Nishihira.
Aye.
Canlis.
Aye.
Wong.
Aye.
Kaur.
Aye.
Chima.
Aye. Agenda item number 5, recognition, presentations, and or action. There is nothing on the agenda. Number 6, public comment, hearing of visitors on topics not on agenda. Is there any?
We have one speaker for a topic not on the agenda, Shireen Purcell.
Hashtag #MeTooTeachers. My name is Shireen Purcell, a teacher from this district, and you just voted to dismiss me. The reason I agreed to resign is because I realized it was the only way I could speak out about the corruption and the issues in this district without being unendingly harassed and retaliated against. Mr. Nishihara knows the history of what happened with Jeff Petavisti. Mr. Smith well knows because I responded to his email 3 years ago with detail, but he would not respond, and the retaliation began right after that. My focus here is to make sure the rest of the board knows all and will do something about it. If not, I will dedicate my time and effort into educating the New Haven parents, teachers, and students about the obfuscation in this district at the hands of Mr. McNamara. Last week, I sent the district office my request for basic data on grades and testing under the Freedom of Information Act, clearly stating I did not want any student names or personal information. I gave specifics about grade levels and content areas so I can have unbiased data showing a correlation or lack thereof between grades and unbiased testing data like NWE and SBAC tests. Since the 3 main criteria in this district's new grading policy are accuracy, equity, and understandability, this information should be eagerly shared. This is much like the data that Ms. Metziger is presenting to you later tonight, showing that only about half of the students at this district are at standard on the SBAC tests, but adds the grading correlation to see if the district grading system is accurate. I received a response back from Mr. McNamara denying my request. Quote, "Unfortunately, you are not entitled to this information under the Freedom of Information Act or the Public Records Act, since the student information you are requesting cannot be disclosed according to California Education Code We are objecting to your request on these grounds." End quote. Mr. McNamara did not include my request in his response to me, as it would have clearly indicated I was not requesting specific student information. Mr. McNamara should understand FERPA, Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, and the Ed Code, and none of the specific information I requested could ever be considered pupil records. This is clearly yet another attempt by Mr. McNamara to refuse to be transparent in what is actually happening in this district. I've repeatedly tried to get this information over the years, as well as parents who wanted to know why you were dismissing high-performance teachers, and the same distraction kept happening. Why does this district not want to be honest about grades and achievement for students so they can be successful? Isn't your number one goal, quote, to increase the number of students who are college, career, and life ready? Thank you. I have a copy that handed out to you with all the information.
No further speakers
Okay.
on topics not on the agenda.
Are there any speakers or visitors on topics on agenda?
We have three. The first speaker is Roxanne Ramos, and after Roxanne Ramos will be Joe Angeles.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Board of Education for giving me the time to represent the Ethnic Studies Department for James Logan High School, as well as Mr. Santos for allowing me to become the Ethnic Studies student representative. I would like to accept the Filipino American History Month resolution to be part of the district celebration this year, as this October we will be celebrating the Filipino American History Month as well as Larry Itliong Day. Hi, my name is Roxanne Ramos. I'm the Executive Director of the Philippine Ex-Youth Organization at James Logan High School. I would like to say that it is with extreme gratitude that I thank all of you for considering to make these a celebration for our district, as it helps us rewrite the history that was once forgotten, and it helps us create a clear path for students that make up 23% of the James Logan High School that I am from, which they are made up of Filipino American ethnic studies background. Our main mission with ethnic studies and with Filipino American History Month is not necessarily to create an area of activism, but an area of awareness and consciousness that we belong to this people, to this nation, that we are not alone with our identity. With awareness, we can lead it to activism and action as soon as we don't repeat the histories that was once forgotten. It is my duty as the executive director and representing the 23% of the Filipinos on the James Logan High School that I accept this nomination. In higher institutions of power, such as the New Haven Board of Education, I would like to think that you not only honor Filipino American History Month, but as well as celebrate it. With the previous social climate and the political climate that we are dealing with nowadays, that helps forget our students and helps remember that we are not only Americans, but we come from our family of immigrants. My hopes is that ethnic studies helps us rebuild the privileges that we understand as people of color, creates visibility, and creates visionaries that not only will be helpful in our high school, but as well as when we go off to the real world. As a student and as a senior about to graduate from James Logan High School, it is with great honor and privilege that I know that when I leave and I walk that stage in June, that I'm not leaving it in the hands of anyone who does not want to honor my heritage or my culture. With this being said, I'd like to thank you very much today.
Thank you. Next speaker is Joe Angeles, and after Joe Angeles is Joe Angeles.
Good evening, President Chima, Board Secretary, Ms. Kaur, members of the board, student reps, superintendent, and of course district staff and folks here in the gallery. I just want to take this opportunity to kind of recognize your thoughts on passing the Larry Itliong Day. I just want to say that on that occasion, it's always a great thing to have folks recognize for the different influences and impact on certain areas. Certainly his background in labor movement and civil rights is really a great one to bring out, but more importantly to have him recognized on a day, because it really matters for the whole idea of that. All of us see quotes all the time and we say, well, where's that quote from? Well, now you can actually put the name and the face with that kind of effort. So I really appreciate a day recognizing him for all his commitment and dedication to California, as well as the different areas he's involved in. And if I may, I'll blend it into my next comment, so it's just one big kind of understanding. The Philam History Month resolution, that's on your desk as well. I think it's a great thing to have, again, celebrating marginalized communities. You just last month recognized Latino Heritage Months in that same vein. And I think the celebration of the communities that make up this district is really a special place, because I was around when, back in the day when we had Marching On celebration. It was a long time waiting when finally both the Filipino community and the Mexican-American community was involved in that performance. And it was one that brought tears to the community of Dakota, as well as the Filipino community, to see their own, so to speak, recognizing this big event that's been celebrated for many years, quote, without that recognition. In that same vein, the Filipino Heritage Month has that kind of connotation, bringing that kind of understanding and thought for this community. The nice thing about this celebration, too, is the fact that New Haven's teachers and students, has a big impact on the whole Filipino-American history piece. It was started back in 1988 by the Filipino-American National Historic Society, which some members from the staff here in New Haven were part of that conversation back in '88. As you know, California and the U.S. Senate and Congress passed that same resolution to recognize that day in '09. State of California recognized it back in '06 through the Department of Education. So the staff here and the commitment to the recognition of those communities has always made a big impact. And just for the commencement of making programs enhanced, just like the student just mentioned, the fact that our involvement here in New Haven allowed for the continuation of this recognition of language in the A through G format, the UC, which means it's now recognized as a requirement to get into college. Teachers here actually wrote the CSET exam for the commission, because at that time when No Child Left Behind created a big void for teachers who were teaching Tagalog but did not have a credential in that subject. It was our staff here in New Haven that wrote that credential, so that now teachers can still carry on that kind of effect and impact on a language piece. So again, I just want to appreciate your understanding and continuing the long involvement from New Haven in those kind of areas, and look forward to other areas in the community that I think are now coming and aware about their place in terms of the importance and contribution to this society, as well as here, right here in local Union City. Thank you.
No more speakers.
There are no further speakers.
Okay. Next on agenda item is information items. Agenda item number 8.1, county-sponsored mental health initiative. Dr. Smith.
Yes, we want to welcome Supervisor Richard Valier along with Eileen Reiner, who will, Eileen just gave me the eye. She didn't know she was on there, but they're here to talk about the mental health initiative sponsored by the county. So welcome, Mr. Valier.
Good evening, board members, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here with fellow alumni Curtis Riener, who's a graduate of Logan High School as well as myself. And we just wanted to highlight some of the investments that the Alameda County has made in this school district with regard to mental health, and that the continuing commitments that we're going to do in the future. And Curtis is going to talk a little bit about the initiative that our office will be launching in the next year. So let me just highlight very quickly that the Center for Healthy Schools and Communities Investment in New Haven through Alameda County has placed 2 full-time behavioral health clinicians here in New Haven, and they work with students and families at Pioneer, Cerros Elementary, Cesar Chavez, Ilion Veracruz, and also they have teams at Guy Emanuel and Kitayama Elementary School. At Logan High School at the Health Center, which is operated by Tiburcio Vasquez Health Center, they provide health services, peer-to-peer health advocacy, and mental health support through La Familia. We have a half-time person that's also doing youth case management services to the unaccompanied immigrant youth here in New Haven. And we also are initiating, I believe this year, the gender-based mentoring program at Cesar Chavez through La Familia. We also provide about $114,000 through Measure A to the Union City Youth Family Center. And we'll be working very soon with the city's program, which is going to be hopefully seeing a new executive director coming on board. Our office, District 2, also provides a generous contribution to the youth, Union City Youth Family Center. Recently, we were going to fund a position there full-time. Let me say something about Curtis before he says a few words to you about the Mission Peak Peer Wellness Program. This young man has inspired a lot of people along his path to recovery. He's inspired me as a human being to have faith in people and to look at people with mental illness in a whole different way. The courage and inspiration that he's gained, I think, is a direct result of his family's support, and then his own strength and character has brought him to this point this evening. This is a huge moment for him, so I hope that you will welcome him. Our office will be funding his position at La Familia through a pilot program that we're working out now with Aaron Ortiz. We had a conversation, the three of us, yesterday. We hope to launch this program again this year to the benefit of students and families here in New Haven in the future. So with that, let me introduce Curtis Riener.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. As stated, my name is Curtis Riener, and I'm here today to talk about our proposed mental health wellness program. To tell you a little about myself, I'm an alumni of James Logan High School, class of 2016, and I have been in and out of mental health treatment facilities in order to address a mental illness that I, like many students, began facing in high school. My symptoms began to appear in my sophomore year. They were minor at first, but by my junior year, they were simply unbearable. Trying to keep up with school while dealing with a whole new kind of pain, worse yet, a pain I couldn't describe to anybody, it made me feel alone, broken, and worst of all, hopeless. By my senior year, my symptoms were at the worst they've ever been. Shortly into the year, I was placed in a psychiatric ward. It would be the first of 6 trying hospitalizations. And not long after the first hospitalization, it became clear I could no longer attend school. Although no longer in classes, thanks to my understanding guidance counselor and teachers, and all the hard work I'd put in prior, I still managed to walk the stage. I used the time previously spent in school to begin intensive outpatient therapy, and that would be my first step on my road to recovery, and would allow me to be here, speaking with all of you. One of the biggest reasons I wanted to get into the mental health field was because I wanted to see to it that no student has to suffer like I did in high school. And speaking of high school, let's take a look at Logan students for a moment. According to the National Center for Children in Poverty, 1 in 5 youths has a diagnosable mental illness, and 50 to 80% of those youths do not receive the treatment they need. That equates to roughly 500 Logan students facing mental illness without the treatment they need, without the treatment they deserve. Our program with our program, I will work earnestly to see to it that this number gets as close to 0 as possible.
Where do we put this? Toward this direction? I'm not good at this thing.
Go one more. I can take it back now. It's plain to see that getting students the help they need is of the utmost importance to everyone involved. However, there is a considerable roadblock that dissuades students from pursuing treatment. Even when a student, such as myself, decides to say something and get the help they need, the treatment they receive may turn them away from seeking further resources. For example, the first time I entered outpatient care, I had a terrible experience. Staff was uncaring, unattentive, and cold. And this is not an isolated incident. There are many treatment centers that seem to generate horrific stories of inadequate care. But while these stories may seem to dominate the headlines, the reality is that many centers and programs provide compassionate, understanding, and engaging care. It is these centers that change lives, and I have been inspired by them to create a program of my own. While I have plenty of lived experience, I wanted to gain more knowledge on how to provide comprehensive care. I entered the Alameda County Accelerated Peer Specialist Program, a course designed to teach one to be an effective peer specialist, someone who takes a more consumer-driven approach to counseling their peers. A consumer is simply someone who consumes mental health resources, and many feel is a more liberating term than patient. My biggest 3 takeaways from the training were, first, recovery is consumer-driven. Recovery begins with the consumer, so we must enable them to help themselves and allow them to be their biggest ally. Second, recovery is supported by peers and allies. Just as isolation and silence begets misery, having friends and peers to talk openly with begets recovery. And lastly, recovery emerges from hope. Without hope, something as simple as getting out of bed in the morning becomes impossible. With hope, the sky's the limit. I will carry these lessons and incorporate them into our wellness program to bring the students in New Haven the care they deserve. Our program, the Mission Peak Peer Wellness Program, will help the young people of Alameda County ages 16 to 30 to, ages 16 to 30 to find peace and recovery. Based in Hayward, the pilot program will provide students with peer and professional counseling, informational workshops and trainings, support groups, various therapies, peer outings, and a recreational center. Care will begin with the consumer, making sure they know they have the staff's full support. Furthermore, consumers will have ample opportunities to form bonds with fellow consumers. And lastly, we will instill the consumer with hope through everything we do, whether it be sharing stories of recovery, helping them on a trek up Mission Peak, or helping them through the toughest of times. While mental illness may be a daunting adversary, not a single one of us is alone. At the Mission Peak Peer Wellness Program, there will always be a shoulder upon which to cry, a mentor to offer guidance, and a friend with whom to laugh and share life. Together, we'll reach the peak. Questions?
Any questions from the board?
I just want to ask a couple questions of how you think this will be implemented, like this program and this training will be implemented like in schools with students.
Richard, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. Through the help of La Familia, Curtis, for example, will be employed by La Familia on a part-time basis. Our office will fund his position. We're going to work out the details of how we can interact with the school district within the parameters that you have, the restrictions with regard to youth and their ages and their parents' consent. As to those details, La Familia is a pioneer in this field, and we've partnered up with them to initiate the pilot. So as we work these things out, we'll come back and report to the board. We have not launched the project yet, so it's just in its infancy, but Curtis is going to be our first mentor. And I think you've all seen the power of one or two people, i.e. Mr. Flake and two young women who confronted him in an elevator recently. So it's incredible the power that one person can have. And in this case, with Curtis's life experience, I think what he's going to bring to New Haven is going to be a great benefit to the students.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Curtis, I wanted to thank you for your courage to come up and to lead, because I know it's not always easy to lead, but you're in a unique position to do that. So thank you for your time and your courage. One question that I have, this is kind of more about the program. You had mentioned a few different schools. I didn't hear Hillview Crest on that list. I'm just curious as to like the process that we went through to determine the schools in terms, was it like need-based? Was it, I'm just wondering if Hillview Crest was in that line of consideration.
You know, I just received this list from Colleen Chawla, who is the Director of Health Services, and the list that she gave me was Pioneer, Cyrils, Cesar Chavez, Ilan Veracruz, support teams at Guy Emanuel and Kitayama.
Okay.
And that's what I have.
Gotcha. Okay. I guess I would just want to maybe learn a little bit more about what we can do to help our students over at Hillview
Lisa.
Crest. Oh yes, please.
Alameda County's supplements what we provide here, so we fund a full-time social worker at Hillview Crest.
Okay.
So they supplement the schools that we don't fund.
I see. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So what you're saying is we fund health support services, mental health support at HVC, and this is this is supplementing where we don't. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments or questions?
Yeah, comments and questions. Thank you again for doing the presentation. It's very enlightening for all of us to know. And this is such a wonderful direction to go to, and I think we really need to address it. I did hear the grade school and the middle school. Did I miss, is a high school, is that one of the schools we're funding already, the high school?
Yes.
Okay, so that's why it's not mentioned. And then, do you have a certain number? I know it's on an infancy, number of students we can serve, or is there a cap on those numbers?
We don't have those details. Hopefully, we can serve as many as we can, but for right now, we just don't have that information.
And then thank you. The other question is, how do students access the services? Do we go through the cost procedures or recommendation by teachers?
Yes, typically we go through the cost process to determine who would need the support.
Could students and parents self place themselves?
Yes.
I think we would contact the school site.
First.
And then we would go through the cost process.
Thank you. This is such a wonderful
Thank you very
direction
much.
to go to.
Thank you. Any more comments or questions?
I have some questions. That's very good information. If possible, and your side and also school district currently provided the resource. Can we get some information and so we can understand more? I mean, how the process, and that's a very good program. I think, and especially for the Asian community, and not aware about this. So, and at least we understand that we can pass by the informations. If you can have any informations and forward to us, and like website, link, contact information, success story, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you. Very good program. Yeah.
Thank you.
District 2 will supply that.
Our office will supply you that detail
Yeah.
through Lisa's office.
Yes, if you can get more information, that'd be great. Yeah. Yes. Good.
And
Thank
also,
you.
Lisa, I think Jeff was asking about that how many mental health service providers we already have. We are supplementing those, so if we already have those, maybe it will be good for us to know. Thank you. Ms. Call?
Yeah. Curtis, I want to congratulate you for, taking or being the face of this program. I think it takes a lot of courage. And as Supervisor Valle said, power of one person. I think your power, your life experiences really is going to make this a strong program. So I'm kind of looking forward to the launch date. And I know you guys haven't mentioned the launch date, but I'm hoping it'd be sooner than later. And you are wise beyond your years. You just graduated 2 years ago. So congratulations on such a great achievement.
Thank you.
I don't have any other questions. I just wanted to ask if there was an estimated launch date or if you had that date in sight.
As for the entire program, we're unsure, but the pilot program, which we hope to have at least informational workshops and trainings or perhaps a support group available, we hope to have that launched within 1 year.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
So for me, all my questions are answered. I just want to say thank you and welcome to our board here and providing those services and information. We look forward to working with you guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
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 so much.
Next agenda item 8.2, 2017 and 18 student achievement update. Lisa Metzinger.
Good evening, members of the board, President Chima, Superintendent Smith. It's with great pleasure that we share with you our 2017-18 student achievement update. This is one of two presentations. We're going to do one tonight and then one at our October 16th board meeting. We're excited to say that, again, this year we've shown growth in both student achievement and student growth on NWEA. We're very pleased with this work, but this doesn't happen without the work of our students, their teachers, our principals and assistant principals, and of course our team of amazing directors who put together tonight's presentation. Tonight you're going to hear about our academic achievement, some of which was updated as recently as this afternoon at around 2:30 when some of the CASP data was taken out of embargo so that we can share with you. as well as some information on the progress of our English learners, our special education students, as well as student discipline data. And so with that, I'm going to share some of the highlights of this year's work, making sure to mention that all of our work is aligned to the district vision and our 3 goals of college and career readiness, equity and access, and engagement and personalization. This past year, we continued our work with the rigorous curriculum design teams. Those are teams working to create units of study across the district. We continue to integrate the 5 C's of cultural competence, critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, and communication. Targeted leadership for our instructional leadership teams continued this past year, as well as our focus on implementing balanced literacy and Math Studio K-12. We continue to provide support for our new teachers and the initiatives started during the Common Core era by making sure that they're up to speed with the latest pedagogy and curriculum when they're hired. Our class sizes remain at 24:1 in TK to K, 26:1 in grades 1 to 3, and 33:1 in grades 4 through 5. This past year, we increased our English learner support by hiring an academic coach program specialist to support specifically the elementary schools, and in particular Hillview Crest, Cyrils, and Emmanuel, where we have the largest number of English learners, and they provided ongoing professional development to staff. Stella provided ongoing professional development to staff, as well as we launched Universal Design for Learning, which is to address all students, but in particular our special education students, for whom you've heard about last year. We're in the red on this California school dashboard. So it's an area that we need to address, and we started at Kitayama Elementary School this past year. And we're moving forward with 3 new schools this coming year, which I'll talk about at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Mattos, Director of Assessment and Accountability.
Thank you. Good evening, President Chima, members of the board, Superintendent Smith. As part of the CAS, the California Assessment of Student Performance and Progress, students in grades 3 through 8 and 11 took the SBAC, that is the Smarter Balanced Assessment. And our students have taken this test for the last 4 years, so we have some really nice longitudinal data that we're going to be able to look back and see their growth over time. Next couple slides, we're gonna take a look at that. Couple of points before we start. The first is that for all groups to whom we have data, and actually we now have data on all the groups, so for everybody went up in reading and math, which is really good. Our students with IEPs made significant growth. They went up 10 points in language arts and 9 points in math. And our African American students really had a very significant gain in math, going up 6 points. It's a really nice slide. Okay. So this graph illustrates the percent proficient of our district, the state, the county, and a number of our selected subgroups. Now, I'd like to point out that at the time I created this chart, we were missing some pieces of data. We didn't have our EL number, and as Ms. Metzinger mentioned earlier, the state and county results for 17-18 just came out at 2:30. So I'll send a revised chart for this one and then the next one, which is math, that has all of that on there. And I'll tell you about how those groups did. At the state level, that would be the blue line that's kind of right underneath the green line. The percent proficient went up to about 50%. 50% of the state students are proficient in reading, which they went up about 1%. The county increased their percentage to 56%. They went up 1% as well. Our EL population, which again isn't on this list, they went from 6% in 16-17 up to 9% in 17-18. If you look at our achievement over the last number of years, you can see that the district really has mirrored the state, and the almost point for point, in as much as there's only 1 point difference back in 15-16 that really you could tell the difference between the state and the district. But as you can see, for all of our subgroups, even EL, which is not on there, everybody went up last year. And just to do a quick rundown, African American our subgroup, Hispanic, and then the SED is socioeconomically disadvantaged. Those are our free and reduced lunch students, as well as our EL and then our special ed. This slide represents our math scores on the SBAC and the percent proficient. And again, I do want to point out that we're missing a couple points. The number at the top, that red line, is the county, and the county went up from 47. They went up about a 1.5 to 49%. The state went up again about a 1.5, and they're now at about 39%, so very close to our 40. And our EL students, which were at 7% in 16-17, they went up 2.5% to about 10%. Again, each of our subgroups went up in math, in their percent proficient. The next couple of slides that we're going to look at is our NWEA, related to NWEA. And this is the MAP test, or measure of academic performance, that our students in K-8 take, and then also our English learners at the high school level take. Unlike the SBAC, which really looks at proficiency, the NWA, we're really looking at growth, kind of looking at students when they come in, and then looking at students when they leave, and kind of making sure that they've made some significant gains. Although we look at growth with the NWEA, there is a correlation mathematically to how they achieve on really at any point in the school year on that NWEA, given the millions of students that have taken this assessment over the course of the last decade or so across the country. They have some pretty good analytics that'll tell you, based on how they scored, where they're likely to score on the SBAC. So this chart is reflecting how our students grew, what their growth scores were. Now, every time a student takes a test in the fall, the NWA calculates a growth score based on, as I said, all the students who have taken the assessment. If a student scored at the beginning of their 6th grade year this number, the NWA predicts that they'll make 6 points of growth or 10 points of growth, depending on what score that they start with. So these scores represent all the kids across the grade level, their kind of consolidated growth targets, what we would expect them to make. Those growth targets are represented by those orange diamonds. Our actual growth, our students' actual growth in those grade levels, are represented by those that light blue bar. So essentially, every time that orange diamond is fully in that blue bar, or the fattest part of it, and more, at least the fat part of that diamond is in that blue bar, that means that the students met or surpassed that growth target. So we want to see those diamonds sitting well in those blue bars. Last year, or I'm sorry, 17-18, about 2/3 of our grade levels met or surpassed their growth target, how many points they went up by, as a grade, compared to last year when none of our grade levels met that growth target. So that was pretty impressive. Similarly for math, this is how they achieved in math. For this year, about half our students met their growth targets in math, compared to last year where only really 2 of the 9 met that target. In the last 2 slides, we really are looking at the average growth. For these next 2 slides, we are looking at the percent of students that actually met their growth targets. And again, we're looking at the district, our African American, Latino, English learners, socioeconomically disadvantaged, and special ed. In general, this is the elementary. The next slide will be middle, and this is reading. In general, students tended to do pretty well in 1st grade, kind of a slight dip over the next 2 grade levels, but then there really is an increase over time till we get to 5th grade. And what I really like to point out, and I think is very important, is when you look at the differences between the groups, say in 1st grade, with over 20-something points worth of difference between our groups. That gap over time, kind of the longer they're in school, that gap really over time closes a bit. So more and more students are meeting those, their growth targets, and the gaps between all those groups are starting to kind of close up a little bit. The next slide is the middle school. And again, maybe not as outstanding. I mean, the difference isn't as great, but you do see they come in 6th grade. There's a significant difference between the groups, whereas when they leave in 8th grade, that difference is minimized. Actually, you know what? I want to go back a slide. I'm sorry. I did want to point out that in 3rd grade, our African American students were really kind of the all-stars last year, and nearly 70% of them met their growth target, which statistically is incredible. They did a really nice job. Sorry, let me go to math. So again, as I said, over time, the longer they're with us, that gap tends to shorten or become less glaring. Okay? So with that, I'd like to introduce Ms. Stevens, our Director of English Learner Services, who's going to walk us through a couple of slides.
Good evening, members of the board, President Chima, Superintendent Smith. In addition to what Mr. Matos presented for the data around NWA and SBAC, I'd like to go and present a couple more slides on English learners specifically. Different height. So one of the data pieces that we look at in monitoring student progress for English learners specifically is our reclassification data. The reclassification data is determining whether a student is English proficient based on a few measures. The first one is that they meet the expectation of proficiency on the language assessment. The second is that they meet the proficiency level and the academic achievement. The third is their grades are a consideration as well as teacher feedback. And fourth, parent consent. So when they meet all 4 criteria, then we determine whether they're reclassified or not. And in 17-18 was a unique year for us because we transitioned on the language assessment from California English Language Development Test to the LPAC, which is the English Language Assessment English Language Proficiency Assessments for California. Okay. So in this transition, CDE did provide guidance on reclassification because we were testing at a different time. Instead of fall, we were testing in spring, and we were also comparing CELT data to new LPAC data. So because of that transition, based on the guidance of CDE, we adopted the criteria that we would use 2016-17 CELT criteria and 17-18 achievement data, which is we measured NWA or SBAC scores to make that determination. And 298 students this past year met that first criteria in terms of language proficiency, and 91 out of 298 met the total criteria. So when we look again at language assessment, achievement, academic achievement assessment, grades, and parent feedback, okay? And the next slide just displays the number of students that are reclassified by site. So another way for us to monitor our English learners is in the past is based on our annual measurable achievement objective, which CDE provides us at the end of the year. You'll see the print on hold there, again, going back to that we're in transition. So we're not comparing CELT to CELT or comparing CELT to LPAC. So it is on hold for 17-18, and we hope to have this information for you next school year when we're looking at LPAC to LPAC. This data usually provides us information on how students acquire language over time, whether they met the language objective in terms of growth that we determine for them. Okay, so this is again on hold, and we will present an update when we have the comparable data between the 2 years. So that's it from my slide. I'd like to introduce Director of Pupil Services, Marcus Lamb, to review the student discipline data.
Good evening, President Chima, New Haven School Board, Superintendent Smith. Tonight I will be presenting our district's discipline data from last year, specifically suspension and expulsion information. We've actually had a good number of years of declining suspension rates, dating back to 2010. Last year we had a little bit of a hiccup with an 8% increase. What I'd like to point out is that our elementary schools and our high schools, they continued the downward trend of reducing their suspensions, as you could tell in the charts. I think we can attribute this to the continued implementation of Tier 1 interventions, which include our staffs getting to know their students and understanding how to use that information to meet their needs. We did have some challenges at the middle school level, specifically one of the middle schools where we did have an increase last year. To address this, we have hired a social worker at that middle school to work with the students they have there with some of their challenges. The school will be focusing on school climate, piloting strategies to support trauma-informed practices. As Supervisor Valle mentioned earlier, we have some supplemental services also being provided at that middle school as well. We believe that these interventions, these additional interventions, will really help support the site, and we hope to see a decline in their suspension rates at this time next year. As a whole district, we do have a focus on providing Tier 1 interventions for all our students, which really socio-emotional interventions to really strengthen our school climates. This next slide here show our expulsions, and as you can see, our expulsions did continue to go down last year. The middle schools did increase by 1, but they still remain lower than we've had in the previous years. This slide here shows the reasons or the education code violations that students violated to get expelled last year. As you can tell, as you can see, most of our expulsion recommendations for expulsions were because education code required us to make a recommendation based on the offense. And this last slide here shows our expulsion numbers by ethnicity. Something I would like to caution us about when we look at data such as this is that we're dealing with such small sample sizes that we expect to see variance from year to year. If you take a look at our African American expulsions, it did increase by 1 from the previous year. However, the numbers of African American students expelled stayed consistent with past years. Our Latino expulsions did increase a little bit. However, it also remained lower than we've had in the past years as well. And I would like to now turn it over to Director of Special Services, Sarah Kapler.
Good evening, members of the board, President Chima, Dr. Smith. I will be reviewing our special education data from last year. As I've mentioned to this board before, a healthy special education population is between 10 and 12%. New Haven last year was about 10.5%, and it has remained so around that number for the last 4 years. You can see that there is a slight uptick, and despite our declining enrollment, it is noteworthy that our special day classes remain full. I also shared with this body last year that CDE was looking at our graduation rate, our dropout rate, and our disproportionality overall, and especially in regards to discipline. We did make significant progress in the last years in the area of least restrictive environment, which you saw highlighted number 5 last year, and parental involvement, which are no longer a focus for us. So to that end, I wanted to give you a visual of how we serve students who have an IEP. If you look at the pink and the dark blue, about 60% of our population are in general ed placements all of the time. If you look at the light blue, that's another 20%. they're in our mild to moderate special day classes. They spend a good amount of time also in our general ed, but not completely, leaving about 25% of our students who require really specialized services in all different areas. When we look at the first indicator, graduation rate, when I think of graduation rates, there are 3 alternative pathways that we have agreed are really legitimate pathways and good for kids, which include adult school graduation, 5th year seniors, certificate of completion for special ed students. Those negatively impact your graduation rate, but are viable, good options for students. We have made a lot of progress. Last year, our graduation rate for special ed students was 64%, and it is now increased to 70.3%. We still did not meet that statewide target of 74.8%. When we look at the dropout rate, we have some good news. Last year, we had our dropout rate of 16.9%, which has been reduced to 7.7%, so quite an improvement, and has met the target of under 12%. What you're looking at here is a chart sent by CDE identifying disproportionality in the areas of discipline. You'll notice that the yellow highlighted areas show that, particularly for our African American students in special education, we are disproportionate for discipline. And as you probably saw from Mr. Lamb, we are disproportionate for African Americans in regards to discipline across the district, regardless of their special ed status. It is also important to note that we are disproportionate overall for identification of African Americans in the eligibility category called OHI, or other health impaired. That's an umbrella term used to cover conditions that limit a child's strength, energy, or alertness. For example, an attention issue like ADHD might fall into that category. So what are we doing? We have created indicator work groups formed to talk about graduation rate, dropout rate, and disproportionality and discipline. All of those groups include district directors, principals, teacher leaders. We've communicated this to the guiding coalition and site leaders to get their feedback. And we've come up with some key recommendations, which include systemic alignment towards our district goals, cross-school communication, Tier 1 social emotional support, alternatives to suspension and expulsion where possible, and a real focus on instruction, including universal design for learning in our elementary schools. As we provide access and students are engaged, we believe this is another way of decreasing discipline and improving graduation rates. Okay, with that, I'd like to hand it back off to our Chief Academic Officer, Lisa Metzinger.
And so, what does our future hold in teaching and learning? I want to start by saying that teaching and learning took most of the budget cuts in this year's budget reductions, which include the reduction of 2 program specialists and now a 3rd who actually has become an AP, but we're not rehiring due to budget cuts. All of our instructional coaches, with the exception of a half-time at Cyril's who's supporting the dual language immersion, as well as a reduction in rigorous curriculum design days and professional development overall. So we have taken a severe hit. We do feel that with coaches returning to the classroom, the only silver lining there is that some instructional expertise is returning to the sites in the classroom, and many of them are being hired as curriculum leaders who are receiving additional stipends to help support teachers at the site level. We're hoping to complete the rigorous curriculum design units of study this year. Ms. Noriega is working on developing with a team of teachers and administrators our ethnic studies curriculum, K-12, with a focus on culturally relevant pedagogy that is also embedded in our RCD units. We continue to move forward with the next gen science standards implementation, and materials for that will become available later this winter, and we're hoping to start a pilot with our middle schools first. We are implementing the new K-8 English Language Arts ELD curriculum this year, the Wonders curriculum, as well as collections that was adopted the year prior. And with that, a connection to our designated ELD programs, K-8, and continuing our work with integrated ELD. The two-way dual language immersion at Cyril's is in full force, and if you can get a chance to get over there and see that, I encourage you to do that. These kindergartners, the first day of school we were there, they, of course, most of them spoke no Spanish. 3 weeks in, they were speaking Spanish, their accents were fabulous, and it is remarkable to see. We're going to do a focus presentation on Cyril's and the two-way dual language immersion later this year. I think it's in January, so you get to hear a little bit more about that. Our site equity councils continue, as does our focus on school climate and Tier 1 interventions, as Mr. Lamb spoke to. And we also did professional development for our office staff on creating welcoming offices to make sure that all of our families, students, and teachers feel welcome. We're focusing on multi-tiered systems of support through a grant, which is looking at providing organized support for students both at the social emotional level and the academic level. And this process will be fostered through the COST teams. At secondary, we continue our work on equitable grading practices. And next time, you're going to hear a little bit more about our work in personalized learning, as well as the LCAP local indicators, our progress in college and career readiness, including the graduation rates. And we're going to have some site presentations in addition to Cyril's. You'll hear from Pioneer and Cesar Chavez Middle School this year. So we're really looking forward to that. And again, I just want to thank our team of directors. I inherited a fabulous team, and I also now have Marcus. They are truly brilliant. I don't think you would find a better team to echo what Orlando has said all the years. They are really remarkable, dedicated leaders in our district, and I could not do my job without them at all. So I just want to thank them personally for all that they do. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you for any questions you may have.
Any questions from the students? No.
Oh, thank you for the presentation. I just had a question of, because we're improving so much, what are we doing specifically and how are we going to continue to do that throughout the years?
Wow. Well, we're doing a lot of things specifically. I think that we have provided a lot of focused professional development on implementing the Common Core state standards, as well as research-based instruction to really engage our students. I'm hopeful that our work in personalized learning has helped with that as well. As you know, through our conversations at Guiding Coalition, really engaging students as best we can, we know is a way to help students move forward. I think our rigorous curriculum design teams, where teachers have come together to develop curriculum, really has made a difference in terms of alignment, making sure that students are not receiving the same thing no matter whose door you walk through, but they're learning the same standards at around the same time, and teachers are working together to discuss which practices are working to improve student achievement.
Thank you.
Lance?
So can you explain to me, I think you mentioned a little bit and I might have missed it, how are the individual growth targets calculated?
I'm gonna turn this over to Tracy and John, but their NWEA essentially determines the growth rates. They're nationally normed.
Okay.
And so they look at students who take NWEA across the nation and then come up with those growth targets.
Are those calculated based on like the adaptive answers and things like that? Or
I believe so, but if you're getting beyond my level of expertise, I'm gonna ask Tracy or John. Tracy and John. Go, John.
We'll see how the rookie does. So yeah, it is, as I said, NWEA is used across the country, and we've been using it, I want to say 11 or 12 years, because we were using it when I was at Easton. So there are hundreds of millions of those assessments that have been proctored over the years. And what happens is the analytics take that score that they get typically in the fall and compare that to students of the same grade and where they're supposed to be, and based on where they are also relative to proficiency. For example, if a student is proficient or above, it's going to calculate a growth target that's going to be smaller because there's they're closer to a ceiling.
Less
as
upside.
as opposed to a student who is below. They're going to have a larger growth target. And so it really is just, it's the analytics in there that calculates what a student at that grade level at that time of the year should be able to do by a certain time.
Okay. A related question is, if I'm looking at the percentage of students that are achieving their growth targets, and if growth targets are individually calculated, we're not talking about absolute proficiency, right? We're talking about individualized growth targets. To me, the numbers actually seem relatively low. So we've got we're in the, got a min of like 31 and a max of 68. Like, I would imagine if those growth targets are targeted to the individuals, I would imagine that those would be, those percentages would be higher because they're more tailored to individual performance. Is that, am I not looking at things like?
So I'm gonna try this, and Tracy's gonna jump in. So based on the statistics here, that we would expect half the students to meet their growth targets.
Okay.
50%. That's kind of the fat part of the bell curve. And so it's one of those things where statistically, you're never going to get 100% of students meeting their growth targets, just because that doesn't happen. And the higher you get above 50, it is kind of exponentially, I don't know, lack of a better word, kind of more impressive. So like if you get, like for example, we had 68% of our African American third graders meet that growth target in math. I don't have the chart memorized for sure, but that'll be something like in the 80-something percentile of achievement, because that is so much over 50. So it really, I think 50 is the bar we're looking, not the bar, but that's the mean that we're looking at, and then relative to 50. Did you okay? Yeah. Ish. Please add.
So take into account what John said earlier in terms of growth targets are determined by where students score in the fall, and then taking into account their grade level and how far they're supposed to go. So there's a mean, right? So across the board, across all of the kids that take the NWEA, let's take second grade for example, right? The average growth is about 13, 14 points, right? And John had mentioned that that's the baseline. About half your kids should be making growth. Anything below that, we need to ask questions. Anything in the 75th to 100%, right? Then that's outstanding. Like, we really want to know what's going on in that classroom and replicate that. So if you look at second grade, 13.1, right, was the amount of points. That's the goal. But then for the students, the observed growth as a whole, that's all the second graders across of our schools. Right, this graph isn't just for one school. If we analyze it by school, it might look a little different, but if we take all second graders across the board, the actual was about 13, right? So it's not at the fat part of the diamond, but it's just about there. So if we look at second grade again, is that case study, you go from last year, they only made 12.7 points, whereas they didn't meet their growth target. So that means that half the kids didn't make that baseline, and that would be a question to answer. But last year, 17, 18, they did about make it, right? So, and then we want to be able to look at, again, all those grade levels. If there is about an average point growth for each of those particular grade levels, does our grade level actually match that or exceed that? So I think, your question in terms of it should look a little different, well, we still have to take the average of all of our students, and that's what this chart shows.
Thank you. No further questions.
Excuse me. Sorry. I still have a question regarding how to read the chart. So, looking for the 2016 and 2017, and you said, John, you mentioned this is the diamond, as much as should be the inside of the blue, right? That's looking for the chart you have now, like the second grade. It is the diamond is above the blue. What I mean, yeah.
So if you're looking at second grade for 17, 18?
16, 17.
16, 17.
16, 17. So that means what NWA calculated, the kind of consolidated growth goal, we would expect to have made, I can't tell if that's the 12.7 or the bar is 12.7. but we did not come close. That bar is floating, it looks like a candle. We don't want any candles. We want it in there. So they fell short. Compared to this year, the second graders, well, actually, what might be a better way to look at it is if you look at the second graders in 16-17 and compare them to the third graders in 17-18, you can see that fat part of that diamond is in the blue. So they did meet that growth target there. So that cohort of students, they didn't meet their growth target last year, or 16-17, but they did meet their growth target this past year.
Okay, what's the diamond is, actually?
The diamond is what NWA says that grade level should score. That's their prediction.
Target. Okay, I
That's
see.
their prediction, and the blue bar is what they actually score.
The blue is the actual data. Okay.
Lance, do you have any questions? Okay, Linda?
Yeah, this is a lot of information. First of all, thank you for making the graphs because it makes it so much easier to understand. We could read, but the graphs makes it so much quicker to see the picture of what is going on. And having created this in the past, I know how much work you put into making this happen. So thank you so much for doing that. I am looking at the reclassified English language learners, and I'm quite impressed about the percentage of reclassification between 2014 to 2018. We did modify the criteria at some point, so it looks like that contributed in increasing the number of reclassified kids.
I think there were multiple factors that went into that.
So where we modified the criteria was 17-18, and actually this current year 18. Sorry, I'm just shorter. But we did modify the criteria for last school year because of the transition and this school year. So going back to your question about what attribute to the reclassification rate, I think it's all that Ms. Messinger mentioned before in terms of looking at that professional development and building best research practices to support our English learner population. Really want to give our staff that acknowledgement of their efforts is making some of these changes.
So the changes in implementation of teaching practices have improved. That attributed into an increase in the number of students who qualify because they are now more proficient in what they were doing.
I would say so, yes, based on the number of cohorts of EL focused teachers that we've had and guided through in terms of our professional development plan in the last 3 years. We've seen some real gains and number of students reclassify in those classrooms specifically at the secondary level. And I think also with the adoptions of a curriculum, tools, and resources to use for our English learners is definitely supporting that as well. First being at the middle school and this school year. We're hoping to see that gain at the elementary.
That was my next question. So are these pretty much similar, the percentage of kids being reclassified in the elementary and the middle schools pretty much similar, or do we get more from the elementary schools or the middle schools or even the high school?
In 17-18, most of the students that were reclassified were at the secondary level. The year prior in 16-17, they were really dispersed throughout. That's where we saw last year when I presented for 16-17, double the reclassification numbers in both our middle schools, where we've had that EL cohort of teacher practice and professional development support for the last 3 years.
Okay, thank you so much. Going to look at the suspension rates and the expulsion rates. It was mentioned as one of the action items, see if I could find it, would be to look for alternatives to suspension and expulsions where possible. I think it's on page 25. What are we exploring on types of alternatives for suspensions? I mean, I could see that you have mentioned about all the tier 1 intervention that are happening in all grades. And if we address them there, hopefully they don't go to the next step. So can you give us some examples of what other alternatives to suspensions, or perhaps maybe even some of the tier 1 intervention, which probably could include what Supervisor Valle has presented?
Yeah, and I think the tier 1 interventions are things we want to do, practices we want to put in place before we get to the point where a student
Right.
would make a decision to get suspended. And
Right.
so, you know, we have social workers that work with students who just have some challenges. I think part of it is having our school staffs understand the kids. A lot of the backstory that comes with some of our kids, the challenges they deal with, so that as educators, we can be empathetic about knowing how students come to school sometimes, and being able to support that. You know, I think in terms of tier 1, getting all our staffs to be kind of on board with understanding that idea, which is what we can, you know, partly what trauma-informed practices are. Understanding that some of our kids do come with the backstories, and you know, I think other types of different types of interventions.
So it might be mindfulness, restorative practices. A prime example might be Hillview Crest and the use of PlayWorks, which really teaches students how to interact on the playground, what type of behaviors are appropriate for the play box as opposed to playing Foursquare, using a common language to talk about how we interact with one another in a positive way, whether it be like a Rochambeau to make a decision on a Foursquare. So all of those preventative measures are really tier 1, and you're hoping that the preventions would stop the suspensions.
Thank you. I've seen mindfulness happen in Pioneer, I think. Yes. I've observed it there last year. My curiosity is with PD resources to PD for teachers declining, have we done in the past examples? You mentioned a lot already, but I'm thinking about systemic way of presenting this to the staff of how we work with our students that comes with different ways of learning to help them understand at tier 1 in the classroom, such as conflict resolution or other intervention programs. Do we have something that is systemic that we have presented as a professional development in the past, or thinking of in the future, that could be part of this next step action item?
So yeah, last year with the District Health and Wellness Committee, we really did spend a lot of our time looking at and making a recommendation for tier 1 interventions that are going to be happening in the future. And so we identified 2. One for secondary and one for the elementary. The first for the secondary was trauma-informed practices, which Mr. Lamb was mentioning, and that really is, like you said, it's really a change in behavior for the adults to acknowledge kind of the trauma that some of our students come with, and how that has a physiological change effect on the brain, and really helping staff and giving staff skills and recommendations on how to run their class in a way that, I mean, I hate to use this word because I think it has a lot of connotation, but that isn't triggering, and that really helps students who have experienced a lot more than some of us have to really be in class and access. That's the secondary level. The primary level, we're really looking at PBIS, and we're piloting that at Pioneer this year, and we're also, I forgot to mention, we're piloting trauma-informed practices at Cesar Chavez this year. They have a social worker that's going to be working with them at Cesar Chavez, and we have some support from the county that's going to be working with us at Pioneer on the PBIS. I think we had a really good misstep at the end of the summer at our advance And I say that because we had folks from the county come and train and do a presentation to all of our K-12 administrators and classified leaders and a number of NHGA folks and CSEA folks did a presentation on trauma-informed practices, and it really resonated with a lot of our folks, so much so that I think people want to start doing stuff before we're done with the pilot, and even some of our elementary schools that we're thinking about doing the PBIS, they're really interested in trauma-informed. And obviously they're not mutually exclusive. I think there's some good things for the trauma-informed practices that all staff, office, noon duty, yard supervisors, teachers can really benefit from. So really the two that we're moving forward with are PBIS and trauma-informed practices.
Thank you so much. I have seen PBIS done school-wide, and I've seen it very effective because it does not only change the behavior of the students who are in trouble, so to speak, but the entire school, including the people that supports the school, including the custodian and everybody else, because everybody's on the same page. They're all singing the same song. So I was kind of referring to what I mean by systemic programs that we could use so that if a child goes from one school to another school, it's still the same or similar procedures, and they're not getting new sets of
They have to
behavior.
relearn the rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're really lucky with our PBIS folks. The Newark had a really nice rollout of PBIS, and the individual from the county that helped them is going to be working with Pioneer. So we're pretty happy with that.
That's good. I really like to hear that regarding Tier 1 intervention. Thank you so much. And perhaps that would really be helpful in finding ways before they become students who are waiting to be suspended. And then the other component I wanted to add is the principal is also part of that PBIS, so that the suspensions don't just happen every time a student is sent to the office. Yeah. Thank you so much.
You done with your questions?
Thank you.
Jeff Bank?
Okay, I just have some question either clear. I mean, you guys did a very good job. And okay, if you can go back to the shots of page 13 and regarding the reclassified English learner. This is a state program, and if you can still tell me, and I usually take how many years to finish the program for the new immigrant, for the non-speaking English and the students, and they come to a school district. Usually how many years? Yeah.
Typically 5 years.
Okay.
Right, for a student, 6 years.
Okay.
5 to 6 years for a student to
So
become
basically, I mean, it's because I see the most of the reclassified happen in the high school and the middle school. That means that they come in like the second or third grade that they graduate, right? Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. That be just want to understand. Okay. I mean, is there any way students can accelerate the process? For example, they learning fast and. Okay, I mean they don't necessarily need to doing that as long as they pass the test, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. And the second thing, and I'm glad, and you mentioned the future plan, and okay, there's one is I like very much, and you think about the next generation science standard, the implementations. Okay. We want to know more information if possible. I mean, the people are very excited, especially last July, and Linda and me, and we went to the conference. Leadership, the conference, we talk about it. Many people talk about this one. I think our parents want to hear it too. We can compare with other school districts, how they're doing. And so in order to, I mean, name our school district, and we are doing better. Yeah, so we have the conference is pretty nice, right?
Well, Don from Alameda County's Board of Education and Bruce from East Bay are all both available to support if we need support on that one.
Yes.
We actually are in partnership with Alameda County Office of Education and a STEM grant that is supporting our teachers in 3rd through 5th grade. Our teachers at the secondary level, especially the high school level, received professional development from a professor at Cal State East Bay 2 summers ago. And actually, we're going to do, as a recognition coming up, one of the things that we're very proud of is our students are receiving coding through their science specialist starting in kindergarten. And so what we're hearing is by the time students get to middle school, when they get into the wheel classes and they're going to the maker space, that the kids already know how to code. We're very proud of that. We know that doesn't happen everywhere, and we want to recognize our elementary science specialists who really took a leap of faith under Vicki Baker's leadership when we had Vicki down here, to try that on. And that was a big leap for them. Veteran teachers who'd been teaching a while, learning something entirely new, and they embraced it wholeheartedly with Vicki's support. And so we're going to honor them at the November 13th board meeting as a recognition for their work. And I'm going to get some snapshots of them and their students. So.
Yeah, that'd be great. I know we did a lot, but we wanted in the newsletters and in the community, the parents, they will know what we're doing.
Right.
This is it. And the last things, and we are already starting the 2 ways and language immersion program. And yeah, we wanted the community know too, and we need more information. And yeah, we started with in the syllabus and Spanish, and yeah.
We won't have data yet. We just implemented it.
We are going to, but we're going to do a board update in January.
Yes. I mean, you and me and the.
He's rushing us.
You can simply tell people that we have started this dual immersion program for Spanish. That's what I have been doing.
No, I mean, we really like this program succeed. Yeah.
Yes.
It will.
Thank you.
Done. Thank you. Ms. Carl?
Yeah, a lot of my questions were actually already addressed, so I'm not going to repeat those. But one question I do have is on the proficiency in the math and English, slides 5 and 6.
Looks like you're taking my question now.
Oh.
That's good.
I noticed that we have the state data, well, along with other groups, and the county data. It's great that we're very much aligned to the state data, but I'm assuming the county data is the average of all our county districts.
Yes.
So it then brings me to the next question of, we're talking about either, and I think it's in the next presentation, the trends of students leaving our district, whether it's trends of, families can't afford to live here. I know that's going to be a big factor. And I'm also thinking if the other factor we'll probably see in your slides for the next presentation has something to do with parents wanting to move to a district within the county that seemingly has better English and better reading scores. So are we keeping those in mind? I know that we're very much, worried about, not worried, but interested in growing those percentages. But at what point do you start looking at comparing yourself to the county versus just the state data?
I think we do compare ourselves to the county, but I mean, different districts have different demographics than ours.
Right, I understand that.
But of course, we want to be up there. We don't want to make any excuses for our data. We want to be up there as high as Piedmont. We do. But, I mean, we want to be up there. We believe we can be up there, but it's going to take us a little bit of time.
No, I understand that. I know I'm not looking for one answer. I know there isn't one answer for this this issue, but I think my just concern is that I think we need to kind of take that somewhat on a serious note because a lot of parents that are looking at this data, they're not necessarily comparing our school to the state schools, right? Or just state in general. They're looking at what's the next city that, if I'm on the border, where would I rather buy a home, right? Yes, demographics play a huge role, but just something to kind of, I wanted to, I think, just address and highlight if there are other programs that might be working for other schools better, given similar demographics. Perhaps we can try to benchmark, or Tracy's getting up. It seems like she has something to add.
Mr. Pisani, our other director of K-12 instruction, actually did an analysis of all of the other districts in our county in comparison to us. And I think he found that in English language arts and math, we were 9th out of 16?
18.
Or 18. So about in the middle. And having been in John's position for the last few years and having seen where other districts kind of fall. It used to be that there's this big gap between obviously Piedmont up here, you know, and then Oakland down here, and we were somewhere in below the average, right, below the 50th percentile. But within the last few years, we've moved up. Something else to think about and consider is the fact that our free and reduced lunch rate has actually increased. So I know there's a lot of families that are struggling to stay in this area, but we have an increase in folks that are trying to make it, right, but obviously need some support in that regard, but our test scores are going up. So question I think for us all to think about is, obviously there are great things that are happening. Our demographic is changing, and our parents are trying to stay here because they know, you know, all of the benefits of being in New Haven Unified School District. If you look obviously to the north of us, Hayward is in about the high 30s, right? Almost not even 40%. 40% of their students are meeting or exceeding standards. And Fremont is such a bigger school district that takes into account numerous different high schools and various sections of socioeconomic levels. So I just wanted to add that because I think that that is something for us to consider, that, you know, if we look at comparison of free and reduced lunch data, that statistic in comparison to our test scores, we should be going down, but we're not. We're going up.
Well, that's definitely a good thing to.
I think I want to add to that though is, and we'll ask this specifically at our superintendent's council meeting tomorrow. But most of the districts in the county are in declining enrollment, so we're not the only one. There are only like 2 or 3 districts that are growing. So people can jump from district to district. They just jump into the same thing. They're not jumping to anything new. If they leave here and go to Fremont, or they leave here and go to Dublin, they may get better test scores. But if they leave here and go to Hayward, San Leandro, San Lorenzo, they're still declining enrollment. It's not programs.
Right. So that's why I said I'm not sure how much of this actually factors into the trends, but it's good to know that the correlation between the free and reduced lunch and then the percentages. The other
If I could just add one more thing to that, I think it's important, and I'm going to steal a little bit of Chris's thunder. It's also, you probably saw in the slides that he's going to present, that we really are a destination district. We have almost 1,000 students that are attending our district on inter-district transfers.
Yep.
So as much as some folks may decide that they want to try to go somewhere else with higher test scores, we're getting hundreds and hundreds of students from other districts that want to come here. Mm-hmm. And so you're right, I just wanted to kind of point out that a lot of folks want to come in, and we want as many as we can take.
And I really think it's serendipitous that we have the presentation from Chris on the backs of this, because I think that you're going to see a relationship that we didn't plan it that way. It just, hey, let's do the presentation on the exit strategy and on the same night as the academic. But as I listen to this presentation and knowing what Chris is going to talk about in just a few minutes, you're going to see a definite correlation. I think you'll be able to make that connection from both presentations piggybacking on one another.
Before you move on, I just heard John say our marketing employee here. I think he said the destination district. I think that's something to springboard from, because we're in the process of looking what is that short coinage of words to get people here. Mm-hmm. The destination district.
The last comment.
It does make, okay.
Sorry,
Sure.
go ahead.
It does make a difference how we present it. So I was, in my mind, I was coining it to be the best kept secret. Our schools are best kept secrets. So I think that's the better words if you want to. So we will see. Okay, Ms. Call.
Just the last comment that was interesting for me to see was that even throughout the declining enrollment, it was interesting to see that the special ed enrollment kind of remained the same throughout the years, but roughly 10%, I think Sarah said. So.
Sarah said it's a destination district.
Definitely.
For all.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
So my questions are also been answered, and I was more concerned about the last part. And thank you so much, Tracy, for explaining it. And we are moving, upticking towards the positive, based on our demographics you just mentioned. But we need to do whatever is in our control. I know we don't have control on the demographics, but whatever we can do to
uptick or at least be at the county level, that's our desire too. So just want to express.
Can I just add one last, or I don't know, maybe I missed it, but did we have the county data last time this similar data was presented to us?
Yes.
Always.
Okay. For some reason, I didn't think we had it, but
Yeah, we did.
obviously.
It's a long time ago.
I know.
So many things happen.
I know as we're trying to wrap this up, I just want to reiterate, Member Romero asked the question about what attributed to the results, and I think we can say with certainty, if we did a full-blown research study, I think you would find, and it's been alluded to, but I don't want to lose the point, the investment in professional development, coaches, the supports that we put into the classroom, aligning the curriculum. I think when we put the investment into our EL department, we created a whole new EL department here. Now it's down to 2 people, but it's still a department. The investments we made over time, although incremental, are paying off. Now, can we sustain that? Building internal capacity was one of the number one things that one of our number one goals when we went for Race to the Top. Let's build internal capacity. Let's not, because we knew that grant was going away. So could the people carry the work forward once the grant went away? I think there's a direct relationship between the investments we made and all of those things, making sure our curriculum was aligned, making sure we invested in the right curriculum, making sure we invested in our teachers and professional development. All of those things are now paying off. The challenge is what happens now, because we're making some reductions, and those supports that we put in are not going to be there. But I wanted to address Ms. Romero's question, because I am 100% convinced I will go to my grave defending what we've done is paying dividends.
So thank you so much for sharing all those comments. I would also like to reiterate that it's boards setting the direction, and it's not easy to move the system like 11 or 12,000 students and then staff, and moving the system uptick, it takes a lot of effort. The mindset, which Dr. Smith has been reiterating all the time, that having even marked the educator on all of our business cards, that makes you think. All of the employees, they are buying into it. So whole thing, we are seeing the impact, but we need to see more. Thank you. Okay, next agenda item is report on the student enrollment trends. Agenda item number 8.3, please.
So the board has been asking for a couple of years, can we get some data? Entry, exit, and I want to really say thanks to a couple of people, Marcus Lamb, Blanca Snyder, John Mattos, pulled some data. And then I went to Chris and I said, okay, you need to package this in a way that normal people like me can understand it. And so he put together this presentation, and we've added to it to really try and make it so that we can comprehend what's happening here. So this is just the beginning. I think that it's going to raise a lot more questions, but I do think there's some nuggets in here that will help us to understand what's happening. So I want to, Chris Hobbs, but formally, let's introduce Chris Hobbs.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Smith. Thank you for this time to be able to present to you. We have compiled quite a lot of information. It's late, so I'll try to keep this to about 45, 50 minutes.
You mean 4 and 5.
So to set the stage a little bit, this is what our enrollment in our district has looked like over the last 20 years. Going back to our peak in the 1997-98 school year, when we were just shy of 14,000 students, down to today when we're at about 11,300. So the good news in terms of being able to answer your question is that we actually do collect a pretty good amount of information on how our students exit the system, and decent information on when they enter. CalPADS, which I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with, but it's the California Longitudinal Pupil Achievement Data System, is this big gnarly database system that we have to upload a bunch of information into every year. And part of that information is when kids leave our system, where do they go? And so we actually do a really good job of tracking those down. And the reason for that is that ultimately that's data that shows up on our dashboard, right? We're talking about dropouts, we're talking about graduation rates, that's all based on how students exit our system. So we do a really good job of tracking our exits. We don't have to report our entry data out to the world, so I'll be blunt, it's maybe not as 100% clean as our exit data is, but I think it gives a pretty good symbol of what we have coming into the system. So what does that look like? So what you're seeing on this chart are our exits, not including our graduates. So these are not our graduating students. That's the path we want them to take. So these are the students that are leaving that aren't graduating from our system. I'm going to skip the first line and come back to it in a moment. But the largest number on here is what we call the 160s. These are students that leave our district and go to another school within the state of California. Now, that could be next door to Fremont, could be San Diego. So that 160 encompasses everything. So whether they're moving out to Hayward or moving out to Modesto, they're showing up in that 160 category. Our 180s are transfers to a private school in California. 200s are transferring outside of California, but still in the United States. So family moves to Texas, they're in that 200 category. 240s, they've left the country. 360s, those are students that completed grade 12 and didn't graduate. And so they did not graduate, but they're not compelled to come to school any longer, so they're counted in that bucket. The other category includes quite a few other things that make up a bunch of relatively small numbers. It actually turns out about 400 of those are transfers to the adult school, so I wasn't real sure whether to call them out separately. They haven't fully left our system yet, but they didn't complete high school on time. It's other issues. Sad to say, we have students who pass away during the year sometime. We have to exit them from our system, and so there is a code for tracking students that die. Codes for students that get into the judicial system. So those are mostly onesie twosies. Again, the lion's share of that other is the 400s. Now I'm going to skip back up to the 140s. As hard as we try, and I know because I've seen the work they do, to try to track down where these kids go, sometimes a kid simply doesn't show up anywhere. We don't get a CUME request from another district. They simply fall off the radar completely. We can't find them in their old home. We can't track them down through their contacts. They simply disappear. It's not a lot of students, but that's what that 140 code represents. Okay? This is all of that exact same data in a nice bar graph for you. And again, the takeaway from this is how that large 160 line really kind of dwarfs everything else on this chart. So it's the exact same data as the previous slide. So let's focus now on those 160s, those kids that are moving to another California, because those are relatively close to us, right? Again, could be anywhere from here to the southern or northern border of California. In this, I tried to find some sort of an idea of is there any sort of a data trend here, and if there is one, it's that as a rule, we tend to lose kids earlier rather than later. So you'll see, and I actually graphed this on this chart, as a rule, we tend to see higher numbers in that K and first grade area, and then that drops over time until we get to the high school age. I'll be blunt, that weird spike in 12th grade for 2014, I can't explain. I'm pretty confident that's not kids leaving in the middle of their senior year to another school in California. That's an anomaly, and I left it in there because I couldn't explain it otherwise. So that's where kids leave. Now, of course, our enrollment decline over time is a net function, right? It's a net of the number of kids we lose plus the number of kids we gain every year. So now let's talk a little bit about how kids come into our system. The lion's share of the kids that come into our system they're coming in for the first time. They're kindergartners. So that is by far the largest number of new students we get every year are kids that are coming in as their first time going to school anywhere. But we also get kids that are moving in from different county, same state. So again, that's just within Alameda County, different district in the same county. Different county, same state would be outside of Alameda County. Different district, same county would be those within Alameda County. And then we have transfers in from private schools and quite a few students that come to us, from outside the country. What I did with this data then was I took it and again looked at it, again graphically, the biggest number here again is the kids who are starting school for the first time. So I took all that same data, instead of looking at it year by year, I clumped all 5 years of that data into one single data set so that I could look at the reason for entry against the grades that they entered. And a couple of things actually did jump out of this when I looked at it this way. The first one I'll point out is that for folks coming into us from other districts in Alameda County, we get a nice spike coming into 9th grade. I think it's fair to say that Logan is an attractive option, and so we do see a pretty good spike. That 274 represents another 20 or 30 kids per year that we get compared to any other grade level in our system. So we get a pretty good bump for our 9th graders. We get a similar bump for kids coming in from parochial school or private school in the 9th grade, which I think says a lot about the choices that maybe parents have in terms of that high school option. But we do see definite spikes in both of those. We see spikes for interdistrict transfers at the 6th and 9th grade year. So again, at that transition, that feels like it's a pretty good time for parents to make that choice to take their kid to a different district. And so we see that spike at 9th and 12th grade as well. So now that I had all this data kind of compiled, I was curious, well, what might I look at? And I'll be blunt, I had kind of a theory of what might help explain some of our decline in enrollment. And so I was able to find a data set that showed home prices over the last 20 years, month by month. So I picked October because that's the same month that we report our CBED, so that the enrollment data is matching the home price data. And I chose a 3-bedroom home, frankly, kind of at random as the data point I was going to look at. And so this graph is plotting the median cost of a 3-bedroom home against the enrollment for that same period of time. So October of 1997 home price versus October 1997 enrollment. And that's what each of those dots represents. And then I plotted a regression against that, and to not get too technical, it is a pretty good correlation between the two. Now, correlation isn't causation, but there is clearly a correlation between those two numbers. This is that exact same data plotted over time instead of just straight XY plot. So here again, we start back in that 97, 98, or 96, 97, and look at our enrollment versus the average price of a 3-bedroom home in Union City, and see how those two trends mirror each other pretty nicely. The long dotted line represents kind of the trend we were at from our peak through the recession. And then the shorter dotted line on the right side is showing kind of the curve since the end of the recession, and the recovery is kind of gotten in full swing. So some observations for what we saw in the data. Again, we lose younger students more often than we lose older students. Logan appears to be an attractive option, which shouldn't surprise anybody in this room. And the best predictor of future enrollment seems to be the state of the economy as reflected by home prices. And with that, I'll be curious to know what you saw in the data.
Any questions?
Okay, first of all, thank you so much for this data. It's very, very helpful. It's good to start getting some boundaries around what we understand the problem to be. And this is all kind of rooted in really understanding the revenue side of our budget, because this has a direct impact. And I think a lot of my comments are around some of the same things that Member Core was talking about, which is really around I have this operating theory around parents taking their kids out of New Haven and sending them to higher performing districts like Fremont. So that will be the overall theme of the things that I'm going to mention. A couple things that I know in the 160s, it's striking. This tells us kind of what is happening, and we have like one theory of causation, which is around the home prices. I think one of the things that I'd like to understand a little bit more is if we poke at this data a little bit more, if we were to take Fremont house prices and we were able to take Fremont's enrollment, and if we use the same methodology, would it bear out that theory? I mean, that's one of the things that I would like to kind of understand a little bit more to either validate or poke holes at the theory that it's home prices, because my feeling is that that while there'll be families moving out of the area, I would imagine there will also be families moving into the area. It's just maybe a change in demographic. Are there dynamics around age, right? So like if you have couples coming into the moving to Union City, and either delaying having children, or like those types of things. I guess the point that I'm making here is if there were a way to kind of use that same methodology that you use to try to prove the causation with Union City, if those same trends would follow through.
Valid, yeah.
That'd be one thing that I'd be interested in seeing. I think there is, I mean, I've got a few, but I don't want to take up everybody's time here. The other thing that I'd like to know is, how are we capturing, there's no other term for it. In private business, we call it the addressable market, right? How many school-age kids live within our district boundaries, right? We've got the data that we have. Where do we pull that data from? I mean, there's other data sources like the census and things like that should estimate how many kids we should have. What data do we use to determine the denominator of all the educatable kids within our district boundaries? That'd be one thing to help me understand. Does anybody?
I'll be blunt, I don't have an answer to that. I'm not sure how I would accrue that data. I know that there are demographers that do that sort of work to collect that data as a service, but I'm not sure exactly how I would get my hands on that data directly.
Okay, so we're working with just the data that we have.
Exactly.
And whether that data it tells the whole story or not, that's the data that we have. Okay. I'm gonna, if we have more time, I'll bring up some more questions, but otherwise I want the rest of the board to be able to ask some questions.
Okay, yeah. The reason we asked for this information is because we wanted to inform ourselves why are we declining in enrollment. And I heard that all the districts are declining in enrollment. That's true. But we want to specifically look at it deeper, as mentioned, to really find why this is happening. And in the past, we were looking at perhaps kids going to charter schools or private schools, but it shows here that that's not really a big number, but it is a significant number because every child counts as far as that ADA is concerned. But it seems on your third bullet that the indicator is affordable housing that cause people not to come here. And I'm wondering how much we need to work with the city if that's part of the biggest problem is how do we work with the city to make sure that families with kids are coming here? Because I'm looking at the new ones happening on Union City Boulevard, the townhouses. There's a lot, $900,000 homes, but they're tiny, which tells me that, or indicates to me that the people coming in there are true double-income families without kids. And when they have kids, they're not going to live there anymore, which means we don't get any kids coming to our schools. So I'm just wondering what we could do with the city regarding affordable housing. And they're saying there is no more space in the city to make that happen. It keeps on going back to the affordable housing and not too small of houses so that people will have kids and live here and send their kids here, because it seems like that's the indicator of what's causing people to move away from here. But I wonder if that is the biggest reason. This is a lot of information, and thank you for dissecting this and presenting this to us, but I'm still wondering, looking at these numbers, the one within the California schools, are they going away from our county or are they just moving to Fremont? And why is that? And I want to share later on items from the board about what realtors are saying out there, because I ran into some of them and I was really shocked about what they're telling the buyers about Union City schools. Well, I'll share the items from the board. So again, I'm wondering if it's really affordable housing that's causing the changes.
So I'll just
something else.
add and just,
Yeah.
I tried really hard not to use the word cause because I don't know that we have data that accurately allows us to say X causes Y. I think there's a correlation, and if I were going to bet on what our future enrollment was, I would bet based on what I expect home prices to look like, but I don't think that necessarily is what's causing it. But it is a strong predictor of what's
Yeah.
happened to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Javed?
No, I have no comment. Just thank you. The data is great, and we want to ask you more. I mean, that's very hard work, and we know that. At least we get some information. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thanks.
Member Cole?
Yeah, I think this is really good data that we had not seen in the past, and for me, I think the more I look at it, the more I will probably understand it and ask more questions. But this is certainly a start, so I appreciate you kind of putting the time and putting this together for us. I did notice, and I think data is, it's all the story that you tell from the data, right? So you can dissect it in a way that you want to present it. If we are collecting information about students that are exiting, and then we have certain codes, I don't know if there's a subcode then that will say, even though a student is entering from a same district, from the same county, seems like that's where most of our entrances are as well as exits to some extent. Can we then kind of see the trends in those districts, right? Again, I don't think we are ready for that data just yet, but the fact that we have a good start, I think we're off to a good start, I feel, with this data. So I feel like the more I look at it, the more I will probably play around with it and think more and ask more questions at a later time. But I appreciate you putting this together for us. And I think the correlation that you made between the median home prices versus the enrollment going back almost 20 years, that's impressive. And you can see a clear indication between the two variables. And I think we've always kind of believed that was one strong variable in terms of, our enrollment. But to kind of see it on a graphical format, it definitely kind of helps seep in that theory. But I do feel there might be more, but this is definitely a great start, so thank you.
Thank you. Les, do you have more questions?
There was a question, but there was also just kind of a request or just for a consensus of the board for us to maybe, first of all, thank you very much. It was, this is data we've been asking for a really long time, and it adds a lot of color to our conversations. What I'd actually ask the board to see if we can kind of get you to continue on this journey with maybe some of the data that we had that I had mentioned specifically around Fremont, just based off of conversations I've had with folks in the community, and additionally to Member Corr's comments. I know that we probably don't have subtypes of the 160 code, but one of the things that we did originally talk about was exit interviews for people when they were leaving the district to kind of get a one-line story as to, like, why are you leaving, where are you going within the 160. Like the people who are leaving the state and people who are leaving the country, like nothing you can do about that, so don't worry about those. Just that big meaty area that we see a bulk. So with the consensus of the board, I'd love to direct staff to continue on with that analysis.
Yeah, I don't have any problem if it's possible to, in the future, having the exit, especially for within the county. If the families move, we cannot do much. But I am more concerned, the one factor you mentioned, Lance, is that if it's possible, maybe, I'm not asking today, or if we can find out, if we can get more data about the census, because I definitely believe that there are people who live in the city, but they don't send their kids to our school district. So if we can, that data I think is not included in this analysis. So if there is any way for us to find out, and if we can then have later on another analysis if we can attract those people. Because at one point I was talking to some educators that, time has come that before the charter schools or special school, they just try to market their efforts to get the students from our district's public schools. And now the time has come for us to market ourselves so that, those people, they send their kids to our school, public schools. So I think if we can find out that number, that how many kids actually go, they live in the city, but they're not sending their kids to our schools for some reason. If we can market to those people, we can outreach to those people, that will be good for the school district.
Well, to find out that information for this one, we can't because this is done, they're gone, right? But our tools, do we have tools where they indicate why they're leaving, when they leave? Because I know when they pull their kids, they just say it verbally, and we put it in, enter it in. But
Well, I think if we're lucky, they tell us. Often we find out when they don't show up, and then we have to go track down where they ended up. You know, or through a CUME request from another district.
that's frustrating. But we have no tools.
I'm feeling this. I'm feeling this urge to protect the staff.
Sure.
I need to be very candid with you.
I know.
Because what you're asking for, there are people who make a lot of money doing this, and our staff, on top of their regular jobs, are doing these to try and present you with data. But I think it's a heavy lift to ask the internal staff to do some of the things. There are people who have PIOs. We don't have a PIO.
Yeah.
There are people who have demographers. We don't have a demographer. And so I feel the need to protect people to do their day jobs and to provide you with the data that you're asking for. So if you want to direct us to hire a demographer and you're willing to invest in that, I'll find a demographer. If you want us to get a PIO, I'll find a PIO. But to keep asking for things that we can't afford and then to put that burden on the staff, I think is unfair. I just have to be very honest. And if you're saying to me, well, do it anyway, we'll make it happen, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. I guarantee you.
Okay. I mean, to be also fair, we've at least, I think the board's been asking for this for a while, right? And so if it's not, you know, I think what the board is looking for insights by which it can evaluate the issue, right? We're looking at the revenue side of the budget, right? And if we're looking for causality, we're looking for strategy for things that we can do. And I think it's not unreasonable for the board to request the insights. However that is created.
So then I would suggest then you direct us and you fund it.
Wait.
And tell us to go, and with a $5 million deficit, I don't think that's a good use of resources.
And I don't think we're asking for the trends every month. I mean, this took a while to put together. I can't imagine that the new set is going to be a brand new set where you're starting from scratch. So you've already kind of built a platform in my mind. And I feel like going forward, it's just a matter of tracking those kind of trends and seeing where you see a different variable that, you know, we missed it the first time. Because like I was saying, this data is very fresh data to us, and I'm sure to some extent to you as well, since, you know, this was all kind of put together from different sources. So if there's a way for whomever is going to be to kind of take this on to continue this process basically. And I don't think we're asking for every single month to kind of present us, because we talk about declining enrollment all the time, right? I think the second or the flip side of that declining enrollment, we're always asking about the cause. What are some of the reasons why we're declining enrollment? And I don't think it's unfair for the board, in my mind, to really ask for what are those causes. I mean, what we found out here is actually a really good variable that we always knew all along, but to see it in data, it kind of solidifies that thought process.
I don't know. I want to be clear. I'm not saying you're unfair to ask. I completely agree with that. What I'm struggling with is the personnel to do what you're asking. That's my struggle. I mean, that's a heavy lift for somebody to take on as an extra project. And so, I mean, if you tell us to do it, we'll do it. I'll find somebody to help us. We'll do whatever. We have students who could probably figure out a way to do this. I mean, but I would ask for your empathy for the stress and additional work that it takes for the staff to do this.
Okay.
Point noted.
Perhaps we could do both if we do it in a different way. It is important that we know why people are leaving and what we could do to increase enrollment to bring back the revenue, because that in itself brings back the money that we need. But at the same time, this is huge to ask. Also, to put someone on the top of what they're really already doing. Perhaps we could do it in small chunks and focus on the 160s probably, and not do it overnight. Maybe it's a whole year project that we are going to do. And then Ms. Kaur said, moving forward, we can't look back and find out why the other people left under the 160s and where they went, whether they went to Fremont or Hayward. That's not something we could change at this point. But perhaps as we move forward and we focus on the one that has the largest number of students leaving, we could start, I'm not saying produce tomorrow, we could start looking at possible reason, and how we do that, we leave it up to you. That is doable. Not, it's not for us to get this data right away. It's for all of us to work together in making sure we get those kids back. And how we do that is finding out why they're leaving in the first place, and whether they're going outside California or further California, or within just outside our city. So I think we could do both without dumping everything all at one time. We could do it in chunks, and eventually we'll get there. That way it's not so overwhelming, and we get the same results, not just as quick as we wanted them, because there's no such quick fix, but maybe if we start doing something and looking at it and move forward and not get overwhelmed, we could actually bring back some of those kids that have been leaving. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, thank you so much, actually producing it first time. Okay, sure.
I mean, I heard the both sides of things. I totally understand, and collecting those data is not easier. And this is the first step, since we did already. Maybe we can ask the school district, we can do just one thing. So for example, student and going away, and maybe after 3 months, 2 or 3 months, we just do follow one email to see. I say, okay, I mean, we know you are leaving the school district. We still care about you, and can you tell us a story? We don't expect everybody to respond. Probably we have like 30% of the email said, oh, we're leaving because some. So, I mean, this probably will not cost too much, the work for the school district. And understand that from you mentioned about the compare with the Fremont, that's a very good data, but it costs a lot and take lots of effort. Probably we can using your model now and just adding a little bit of information so we can understand better. So those data, we just assuming, we try to tell the story. Is this really true? It's probably we need to dig a little further. So
maybe what we can do is in the future we can have a discussion that how much data we are asking for and how the analysis will be done, and not today. And,
I heard 4 things tonight. I heard you want to know parents taking students out of New Haven to Fremont, the comparison of a 3-bedroom home in Fremont to New Haven. How are we capturing the school-age kids who live within our boundaries? And then what to do, and this is more your side than ours, I think, but what to do with the city regarding affordable housing. That to me is a council to board conversation. I can have that conversation with the city manager, but there's got to be some interaction between the board and the city council on the impact of rent stabilization or whatever on the schools. It's conversations I've had with both the city manager and the mayor, but I think it's going to be more powerful from you to their body. Those are the 4 things I heard. What am I missing?
We can have the update from the city side, or we can request them if they are able to present it to us on the quarterly meeting when we have joint meeting with the school board and the city council in the future.
That could be an agenda topic.
Yeah, that could be one of the agenda topics. And I'm asking from the board that if you would like to have more information, how we can handle this? Maybe later on discussion point?
I don't want to add more on the staff that's already
No,
overwhelmed.
among ourselves, on the, maybe your agenda today, we can just.
I don't understand. What do you mean?
I just gave 3, the city one you said we could do it a joint with, but there are 3. Are there other things you're asking us to look like? What other pieces of information would you like for us to explore?
Lance, do you have any preference?
The ones that I had, so the one about the affordable housing, the 4th one that you mentioned, that personally, that's not.
That was me.
That wasn't necessarily one of my asks.
Mm-hmm.
One was around charting out basically applying the same methodology that you used to determine the causality for Union City, to use the same data points with Fremont to see if the same trends hold up. That was one. The other one was to dig a little bit deeper into the 160 code, and to be clear, that would be a nice to have, but I actually think that those things are probably more of like qualitative interviews. Yeah, like I don't know how much of that you're actually going to get through the existing data that we have. It's going to require that's going to require, I think, a little bit more heavy lifting. And then the third one was around what is the addressable market for students in Union City? What is the real denominator here? And so I'm thinking that there's probably census data that will explain to us like how many kids there are, how many people there are from birth to 8 or from 5 to 18 that should be in our school districts, and are we capturing it all? Because I remember looking at that data at a very cursory level a while ago, and I don't remember it being trending up or down, but so I just want to make sure that we understand really what the real data looks like, and that is those were the asks that I had identified.
I think some of this may be already available through the city. They may already have it, but.
Lance, can I just add one thing to your ask for Fremont data? I personally don't think it's going to be comparing apples to apples.
Okay.
Because Fremont has had so much development happening, and there's very minimal development happening in Union City.
So you're saying
Fremont has a lot of new schools being built with that development.
Okay.
So, and we haven't had, I mean, other than closing one school, we haven't had any new properties that were opening up. So I personally feel that it's not going to be a apples to apples comparison.
Fair enough.
But to see a trend, maybe, but I just don't think it's going to be an apples to apple, like I said.
I think that's totally fair.
Yeah.
And so I guess what I'm really kind of grabbing at is some type of causation.
Yeah.
Right? You're right, it may not be an apples to apples comparison, but if not, how do we get to the insights that will help inform our strategy for figuring out how we can get more students into our district? And so, yeah, maybe that one, maybe it isn't an apples to apples comparison, but if not that, then what? I guess.
Yeah. Well, and lastly, I have worked with lots of data in my past careers, and I know that it takes a long time to build a structure, but once you have it, it is a little easier to tweak things and add more things to it. I'm not saying that it's the case across the board, but and given how much data that you presented, I can imagine it had taken you a while. So we appreciate it. I appreciate it that you presented this data.
I want to be 100% clear. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really kind of.
This is all good, right? And I think the best outcome is that we have this conversation up here, which is the conversation we haven't been having. And so regardless of, even though this feels like a kind of a strained conversation, I think it's good and it's healthy.
It was needed.
But it's needed, and we're having that conversation. It's because of the data that staff was able to put together. The best research is the ones that create more questions.
And to that point, I think someone made the question. When you go to a coffee shop and you sit and you're just having a conversation, all of a sudden things come to the surface and you say, oh, that's really what this is about. And I think whoever just said, what's the strategy for how to get more students into the district? That's the essential question.
That's what I ask.
That's where I think we should spend our time.
Yeah.
This is good data to have while we're losing them, but that's different for how you attract them.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think whoever just said that, after all of this, finally got to what it's about. And that's what I would encourage us to spend our time on. We could spend years on this and never get to that question.
That's what I'm saying. So we have this, and this one looks like it shows a pattern of an N160. However, we cannot go back to these people and find out what city did you go to, because they're no longer here. But moving forward, if we suspect, based on this data, that certain groups or certain reason is the cause for them moving, what can we do moving forward to get them back?
Not to prolong this, but the term destination district was used.
Yes.
And if you just look at the slide, Chris's slide 10, and I think he alluded to this, under different districts, same county, you look at 9th grade,
Yep.
it goes up to 274. There's something in that number right there that says what attracts people to come
Logan.
back. Just exploring that would answer this question.
Yep.
Right? So again, we can talk about why we're losing them. We can't control home prices or anything like that.
Yep.
We can control what we put into New Haven. And what are those programs that would attract more people if they could afford to stay here? Would they stay here for 5 dual immersions? Would they stay here for social justice academy? What are those
Makerspace.
things, makerspace? So over the next 5-10 years,
Yeah.
you say, these are the things that we're going to put our efforts into because this is what we know people want versus.
And we have to talk about it and we have to communicate it out.
Yes.
It does us no good if we have this awesome maker space at our middle school and nobody knows
That's
about
right.
it. Right, it doesn't see the outcome from it.
But to me, that was the essential question, and we finally got through it through all of this. I think that's, I'll say it again for the 4th time, that's where we should be investing our time and energy.
And I think we had that conversation briefly when we requested this data. We were asking, yes, there are a lot of great programs, especially now that we're seeing the data that a lot of students are entering in Logan, right, at high school level. We know there are a lot of great programs, and some of them have been highlighted to us in the past, and I think it's going to continue. And I think it was, I had asked at that time, are we keeping some sort of tally? I know we kind of dwelled on the exit, and I think you guys brought up a good point of those students that are coming in. What's attracting them, right? Is it our sports program? Is it our band, or is it our forensics? And I don't know if we're currently doing that when they do enter or they do an inter-district transfer. So again, I guess going back to your point, what's really bringing those students in? That could be one of those programs that we could look at and then potentially see the impact. I know personally, as a matter of fact, there should be another student coming from Hayward soon. I was just, somebody had approached my mom and I had to explain to them how to do that. So I said, I'll gladly walk them through it if they need me to.
Every board member
Yeah,
committed
right?
to like 5.
I've already
And I
backlogged.
know I have personally seen many parents that have switched district for the forensics program. And same goes for, I'm sure, the band and track, right?
Yep.
So again, I think it's conversations like that that actually allows us, because it's really rare all of us actually ever talk about this kind of data on our own. So to me, I think it's important that we're having this discussion. And it's all because of your data that's causing it. And I think you really did take your 45 to 50 minutes. So.
I wasn't intending. If I could just add 2 quick things.
Okay.
First is, John didn't really steal my thunder because I didn't include the data in the presentation. But that is that we do have in the buildings today about 800 to 900 IDAs already. And we lose about 200 IDAs to other districts. So we're net quite far ahead on that. And so that definitely, I think, goes to the quality of programs and the desire of people to be in our campuses. The second thing is, while I thank you for your recognition of the effort that went into this, I had the easy part of this because the data is good and clean because our site staff do a great job, our centralized enrollment folks do a great job, my database analyst who manages all the CalPad stuff does a fantastic job. It's because they did all that hard work that I got to make a presentation that looked good to you, but it was really based on quality data that they provided.
It still begs the question, what is our next step?
Okay, I need to add one more thing, Sam. I mean, this data is good. I mean, we also missing one data when we ask the student graduate, what school they go to. I mean,
Well,
we
that's a
can
different
ask.
conversation,
I mean,
though.
it's the same. I mean, we want to increasing the enrollment, right? Not just looking for this data. Another thing is what school they go to after graduate. This also another part. Yeah.
That's good data, Mr. Wayne, but that's a separate conversation. I think right now we're just trying to see how we could increase our enrollment. So the question is, what is our next step? And that is agreeable with everybody here.
So I think we need to have like.
Ms. Heldman has her hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I think we're past 45 minutes, but I hope this doesn't
Thanks, Chris.
add a monkey wrench into this. Chris, can you go to slide 12, please? So this,
There is a correlation.
to me, am I seeing an inverse relationship between home prices, which is an indicator of the economy,
Yeah.
and our enrollment? So when the home price is low, our enrollment is high.
2010, yes, it got reversed, yes.
So that's what I'm seeing.
There is some
We have
correlation.
more kids when home prices are low, right?
Yeah.
So we were trying to talk about this and coming up with different theories as well. I mean, like I said,
Right. No, it's one theory, but at the same token, like we have previously mentioned, Fremont, this theory might not work there. And again, for Sunlia and Roe Hayward, there is a scale, they have a little bit lower price than Union City. Their enrollment is not increasing, so this theory does not work all the time. So, but it's a good theory.
One of the things that we kind of discussed in the last recession is, it was a theory, and I think Chris and I mentioned it, people move in with families, and they cannot afford to live on their own or pay rent anywhere else, and they move into families, therefore we have instant kids in our district. And when the economy got better, they all moved out. I mean, that's kind of what I'm seeing in this thing. I hope that doesn't throw a monkey wrench in that.
It does.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's a good thinking. I'll be trying to kind of finding out the reasons. That's all. So I think for the future steps, like you mentioned, Linda, so we need to have like strategies to increase our enrollment. So under that, we can have different steps. We can define different steps. What we need to do.
And it's a long-term project.
It's a long-term project. We are not asking. We're not going to
happening.
reverse the trend right now.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Well, there are multiple approaches. One is you can say, go out, do the research, come back and bring us some strategies. Or you could say, we want to have a session. You've already committed, I think, to every Tuesday in October, but we want to have a conversation and do some brainstorming and put it together as a board.
Yeah.
We can
I
bring
think
it back or
that'd
you
be a
can
good idea,
create it. It's your call.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we would want to spend our
Next
money
year.
on that.
No, next
Getting
year.
somebody, but
In
I think we
2019
could
maybe.
talk
I'm saying
among ourselves.
we as a staff could do some research and come back and say, here's some options that we came up with.
Yeah.
More dual immersion, more resources into the band, more resources into, for instance, create 2 or 3 academies. Everything seems to go to the upper end, to the high school, but what are we doing in the middle schools and
Elementary, especially
elementary to attract people? So we can do it either way. Your call.
Yeah. So we will, I think, schedule a session maybe. Hopefully I get to participate in that session in 2019.
The other Tuesday.
Okay. So I think that's it for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris, for all the information you provided, and you have compiled all the data. Thank you. So it's all good.
Time,
it's
Chris.
all good. Yeah, I mean, it's not our intention to kind of, put more burden on staff. We want to work with you, and we appreciate we're working together.
I just feel like I have to protect the people.
Thank you so much.
I don't,
That's
nobody's afraid of hard work, and I'm telling you.
That's one of your jobs.
Well,
We understand that. Okay. Then, 8.4, agenda item number, items from the board and superintendent, please. Can we start from Lance, because of students, they might have.
I'm going to yield my time because I think we've talked enough.
Yeah, okay. Linda?
Please don't throw tomatoes at me. I have a, shall I go last?
No, you can go, it's fine.
All righty. First of all, thank you for putting consent item agenda number 10.4 and 10.5, and we'll talk more as we get to the consent agenda on that one. This is regarding Itliong and Filipino History Month. The AXPA meeting on September 20th went really well, and what came out of that is really exciting, because we are finally getting more school board members involved, especially, hopefully, we will have additional discussions with not just AXPA, but also Superintendent Council and other educational organizations on discussing a common ground that we will talk about later on, and I think everyone will, hopefully, will buy into it. I'm not going to share what that is right now, because it's in pre-infancy. Next meeting for AXPA is in January, and we have confirmed Speaker Banta and our superintendent to talk at that one. It should be a good meeting, and next one would be in March, and that would be focusing on STEM. I'm doing an abbreviated sharing right now. October 6th, we have Science in the Park, and nobody here at RSVP'd yet, right? I know I did, but we're okay. I just want to let you know that if a board member shows up to this, just to show up and let them know, we get $1,000 for our foundation. So I got it covered.
I plan to come.
Well, it doesn't increase. It doesn't increase when you have 2 board members, because I did ask that question. So I said, if I get all board members come, can we get $5,000? I said, no, it's only $1,000 for the entire district. And then for the competition, however, if your egg did not break, it's another $1,000 for the foundation. So, but again, we get only $1,000 whether all of us did not break. Right, so 2,000 possible we could make just by showing up and making sure your egg doesn't break. Right, so the next AXPA, actually not AXPA, CSBA meeting is on October 13 in Oakland, and it's a breakfast. I highly recommend to be involved in addition to what we're doing already, because it allows us to be able to take part in the decisions made for our schools from Sacramento. So that's October 13 in Oakland, breakfast provided. Please get involved. In our board communication, we have received a report on how much money have been received and where has the money been gone. I highly recommend not just us to look at this, but also people at home to see where our money is going, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. It's important that people actually do access what we have received and where's the money going, so that when we hold conversations, it's very clear where that money is. And it's just really frustrating when people make conclusions without really knowing the story. I want the world to know and thank again this collaborative staff and collaborative board members. And by that I mean the district leadership, everyone out there working with us and this board, because even though we hold these communications, so we have different perspectives, we have different views, we still have our kids as our focus. So I want the world to know that this is a very highly effective functioning board and leadership teams, district leadership team, and because of that, we're able to do what's best for our students. And somehow I want to tie that later on into our goals with CSBA and OXBA and the Superintendent Council about marching to Sacramento and get more funding for our schools. I wanted to share an experience that was really shocking to me was while I was walking in the neighborhood. There was we met a realtor who thought that our district is not doing a good job. To make the story short, his bottom line was he was saying that he was sending people to buy homes in Fremont. That's why I said we're going to address this back in a few minutes, because he thought our schools aren't that good. Well, you know, I was ready to do what you think I want to do, but I thought we were going to enlighten him instead. But that's only one person, one realtor, who's doing a lot of damage to our city. So I'm wondering what we could do as a recommendation. I immediately thought, well, we need to really invite those realtors for lunch and let them know that this is a good district. And I'm thinking, how could you send people to Fremont because of our schools? Because we have great schools. And it took me a long time to hold that conversation, because I wasn't going to leave this person with that mindset thinking our schools are not good. But if one person is thinking that, what other realtors are thinking that? So I thought I'd share that because it's something that we might want to take a look at. That would be it. Thank you.
That's it? Okay. Mr.
I
Wayne?
was just add on this one. I'm not just heard it one time
It
for the
wasn't you.
realtor.
I know.
I know. I mean, I'm not a real estate agent. Okay, there have many times, and now I don't spend too much time to tell them. I said, just ask the alumni and see what school they go to. Most parents, they're looking for, and after they graduate, what school they go to. So real estate tell the people, if you cannot afford by Mission, San Jose, you buy the American High. Okay, so that means that's why I ask, and the data could be tell the story. How many students we going to the top 20 university? How many students we going to the California State? That's another information, so we can broadcasting. So real estate, and they are very close-minded. If we give those data, they may follow. I have no more to input. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Carr?
Yeah, I don't really have much to add, but just to kind of add on to Jeff's point, just to be fair, I think he did ask for that data. I remember we were in a special meeting and we were having a discussion about the graduation rates and, you know, along with where do these students go? We know that 30% of our students or 40% of our students were part of the honors convocation. We know that, you know, big chunk of them go to wherever they end up, but I think, just to be fair, I know you keep bringing that up. I know he did ask for that, and we all kind of agreed that it would be a good data to have.
That would be another data set, right? And I think it would be good data to market our schools. Yeah, that's easy one, right? So for me, I attended a few events in the last 2 weeks. I was able to participate in the Latino Parents Advisory Council on September 27. I wanted to hear the first-hand experience of the immigrant communities, and it reminded me, some of the parents' conversation, they reminded me when I was new to the district and my kids, they've been through those kind of, you know, experiences. So it was a good experience, and I think I am contemplating maybe to have another advisory committee, not to put more burden on our staff. I want to see how the model works. Ourselves, we can take lead to create that kind of, so maybe Parents Advisory Council, so that more parents, they're more informed about how school system works and they participate more. That's the whole intent, for them to educate them. And then last weekend, I was able to participate in the TED Talk across our school district, and it was a good conversation. But the hard part is how to implement all those refreshing ideas they have shared with us. And half of the speakers there, they spoke about the education, early education, and schools. Education makes a big difference how the society develops. So I wish our staff could have participated, or maybe in the future they might have some kind of, I think recordings are available, I believe, right? So maybe we will be able to share it somehow. Some of them, they were very good. And also, September 21st at James Logan High School, I was able to participate in the Parkland initiative to register juniors and seniors at the high school. So I signed up for 2 hours, but then the League of Voter, they needed more volunteers, so I ended up staying the whole day. But it was very, very good experience. It was my first time participating, and it was very good civics lesson for our juniors and seniors. We registered around 680 students on that day. And I also attended our State Senator Bob Bukowski's State of the Senate session at Chabot College. There are laws and policies developed at the legislature which impact our schools. So I'm not going to share all of them, but some of them, they were very close to our work. So need to be more involved at the state level. So because the funding situation we have, once we go there, when we march to the California Capitol, then those relationships, they do work and they do help us to have some friends in the legislature.
AXPA, come to AXPA meeting. They're there.
Right, okay. And I also attended some of the back to school nights especially at the Pioneer Elementary School. Their PTA, PTC, and school site council, all the volunteers, they were very, very active, and they were recruiting parents for many volunteer activities. I signed up to be one for the Halloween day. They asked me, so it'd be fun. After a long time, when my kids, they were, in the school age, then I used to go, but it'd be fun again. Thank you so much. And did you have anything extra?
What happened to our students?
I think they might be feeling too late already. So
I think have school tomorrow.
My mom just called.
Just really quickly, we're getting out of here, but
Oh, for sure.
I want to thank everybody tonight. It's like Lisa and her staff, the directors. I mean, I've worked directly with them. They truly are amazing. Some of the best in the business. Chris and his staff, the back work that they did to pull that data together. Chris formatted it, but it took some energy for asking the right questions to get the data. And that her staff on the infographic that Linda shared. I mean, this really is a talented group of people in this district, and I always feel the need to say that because I think people just think this place runs, but there are people who come here. I mean, Sharon came in, member Carr, let's be formal, and asked a question, and Jason got the answer like this, and there was another question, and Sarah Kapler came right down with the answer like that. I mean, it's just a place where you can take a lot of pride in working, and so I really just want to thank all of them for what they do from top to bottom. And so with that, I'm done.
Thank you so much for saying all those words you have just mentioned, and also that tells that the board asks for the hard questions and data, and and you guys presented to us. Thank you so much. Moving on to the consent agenda items. Are there any items that members have questions or need clarification or would like to remove for separate vote?
I just have comments for 10.1, 10.4, and 10.5.
Anybody else? No. Okay, Linda, 10.1.
For the minutes, it's a minor thing where it says, on one of my bullets, it says relative engagement. It's relevant. It says meaningful engagement. And then for 10.4, I wonder if I could ask Ms. Noriega to read it to us. What happened
The
to
resolution.
everybody? I thought there were more audience
Because
a while
it's
ago.
9 o'clock. Now Tracy has to read it.
Read fast.
Thank you for staying. We lost our audience.
The lone Filipina. Oh, one more, plus one more. Okay. Am I reading 10.4?
Yes.
10.4.
You're
Okay.
at 249.
Well, first of all, good evening.
Good evening.
President Chima, members of the board, and Superintendent Smith. I am Tracy Noriega, Director of K-12 Instruction, but right now I am representing PASE, the Filipino American Society for Education. As you might know, that our group was established at the request of then Superintendent Guy Emanuel in the early 1990s. So we're made up of teachers, classified staff, administrators, parents, and community members. And we're also part of a bigger statewide organization, FAAC, the Filipino American Educators Association of California. Our work locally and statewide includes ensuring that Filipino American history is celebrated and learned about in our schools and community. And you know that almost 30% of our students here in New Haven are of Filipino descent. So it is absolutely culturally relevant for us as a district to teach lessons about Filipino American history. And through these lessons, our students will understand our struggles, but also see the connections we have to each other, as well as acknowledge the contributions Filipinos have made to U.S. history. So before I read the resolutions, I'd like to thank you for passing the resolutions in honor of October as Filipino American History Month, as well as recognizing October 25th as Larry Itliong Day, which is a day already recognized by the state of California and a day named after the namesake of one of our schools, Itliong Veracruz Middle School. We also invite all of you and the community to our Filipino American History Month event, which is on Saturday, October 27th at IVCMS. The event includes a day-long basketball tournament, in case you want to enter a team, youth workshops with topics to include college preparedness, mental health and wellness, as well as Filipino American history. Our students will share their talents and perform, and we'll also have local vendors, including Filipino food. Okay. So I will start with the resolution in honor and recognition of Filipino American History Month, October 2018. Whereas this is an appropriate time to promote and reflect on the richness of Filipino and Filipino American history and culture, and to provide all Americans with the opportunity to learn and appreciate and honor the Filipino Americans and their historic and social contributions to the history of the United States of America. Whereas our New Haven Unified School District is the first in the nation to name a school after Filipino farm labor leaders Larry Itliong and Philip Veracruz, and whereas it is necessary to instill in our youth the importance of education, history, and ethnicity in creating eminent role models, in establishing a proud cultural identity, and producing exceptional citizens of this nation, and whereas the Filipino American National Historical Society established Filipino American History Month in 1988 and subsequently every October, several communities throughout the United States and its territories have celebrated this occasion to commemorate the anniversary of the presence of the first Filipinos in United States soil and to observe its heritage and recognize the social, intellectual, and economic contributions of Filipinos and Filipino Americans in this country. And whereas Filipino American servicemen and servicewomen have a long outstanding history of serving to protect and defend this country in the armed forces, from the Civil War to Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts. And whereas the earliest documented evidence of Filipinos in the continental United States occurred on October 18, 1587, when mariners called Luzones Indios under Spanish command landed in Morro Bay, California. And whereas today the Filipino American community is the second largest Asian American group in the United States, with an estimated population of 3,400,000 people. And whereas our city of Union City has an estimated population of 14,000 Filipinos and Filipino Americans, who have had a profound impact on California history, values, and culture. And whereas the Filipino community played an important role in Union City's rich agricultural history, thereby helping to shape its landscape, and whereas immigrants from the Philippines and their families truly have enriched our nation through their work in agriculture, their services in the armed forces, their contributions of skills and expertise as engineers, scientists, accountants, teachers, lawyers, nurses, doctors, and their participation in public offices, civic affairs, and community activities. And whereas Filipino American History Month was first proclaimed by the 111th Congress of the United States in November 2009, And now, therefore, be it hereby resolved that New Haven Unified School District hereby issues this proclamation in honor and recognition of October 2018 as Filipino American History Month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we, can I just do 10.5 after, or?
I think we should go ahead.
Okay. Since everybody else has gone home, is it okay if you read 10.5 as well?
Read, okay, that one.
Unless anybody else wants to read it?
Can I volunteer you?
No. I've talked enough tonight, I think. Okay, thank you.
Okay, 10.5, let me see. Oh, I don't have the print.
Okay, this one is the New Haven Unified School District Proclamation recognizing October 25, 2018 as Larry Itliong Day. Whereas Larry Itliong was a native of the Philippines and was born on October 25, 1913 in San Nicolas, Pangasinan, and whereas at 15 years of age with only a 6th grade education, Larry Itliong moved to the United States of America in 1929 as a result of the Great Depression, Larry Itliong was forced to work on the railroads and then as a migrant farm worker traveling through Montana, South Dakota, Washington, and finally California. During that time, Larry Itliong learned the plight suffered by Filipinos and other immigrants working as farm laborers. And whereas Larry Itliong was a prominent leader in the American farm labor movement, he organized a group of 1,500 Filipinos to strike against the grape growers of Delano, California, and continued on that strike for 8 days while suffering through violence imposed by the growers' hired hands and the sheriff's department and being thrown out of the labor camp. And whereas despite this treatment, Larry Itliong remained tenacious and resilient, calling upon Cesar Chavez and his followers to join forces with the Filipinos and strike together. Duly, partly as a result of Larry Itliong's persuasiveness, the two groups combined, establishing the United Farm Workers of America Organizing Committee of the AFL-CIO, which led to the United Farm Workers of America. And whereas Larry Itliong moved on to become the president of the Filipino American Political Association, the first national political Filipino-American organization and a crucial alliance between Filipino professionals and laborers that grew out of the Delano grape strike. And whereas Larry Itliong was also instrumental in the founding of the Pablo Agbayani Village, a retirement home built by volunteers for retired Filipino manongs who no longer had families and needed a place to call home. And whereas Larry Itliong passed away in 1977 at the age of 63, leaving behind his wife and 7 children. Whereas Larry Itliong's legacy has been acknowledged in New Haven in part by the renaming of a school to Itliong Veracruz Middle School in honor of Larry Itliong and Philip Veracruz, it is the first school in the United States of America to be named after Filipino-American labor leaders. And whereas the accomplishments and contributions of Larry Itliong should be properly memorialized within the history and culture of the United States of America. Now therefore be it resolved, the New Haven Unified School District does hereby proclaim October 25, 2018 as Larry Itliong Day and will commemorate the day with appropriate instructional activities that remember his life, recognize his accomplishments, and familiarize students with the contributions he has made to the state. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So may I have a motion and a second to approve consent agenda items 10.1 through 10.15?
So moved.
I'm second.
Roll call, please.
Nishihira.
Aye.
Canlis.
Aye.
Wong.
Aye.
Kaur.
Aye.
Chima.
Aye. There's no more further business. This meeting is adjourned.